Hey friends, Julia Buckner here, and welcome to Stories of Becoming. This is where we talk about what it means to become the church that we have so long prayed for, a church where everyone can serve, love, and lead. Have you ever wondered what keeps someone in the church after they've been told no again and again? What gives a person the courage to stay, to keep showing up, and to keep believing in grace, even when our institution itself feels anything but gracious? This week, I sat down with ministers Michelle Levan and Angie Cox, whose stories remind us why grace still matters. Both of them have walked the long, painful road toward ordination, hearing not yet, or no, or just hang on, more times than anyone should have to. But they didn't give up. They stayed. They held on to grace, and in doing so, they held on to the United Methodist Church so that we can become more like Christ. In this conversation, we'll dig into questions like, what does it mean to stay when it would have been easier to walk away? How does grace sustain faith when systems fail us? And what does it look like to reclaim your call in a church that once said you didn't belong? If you've ever wrestled with your place in the United Methodist Church, or wondered why anyone would stay when staying hurts, this episode is for you. All right, let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Michelle and Angie as we talk about calling, courage, and the grace that keeps us here. Enjoy. Michelle, Angie, thank you so much for being with us today. I thought I would start by having you, a couple of sentences here. Do your quick elevator speech introduction so that our listeners know who you are. Just start with that, and then we'll go into a little bit more about your call narrative. So, Michelle?
Sure. I'm Michelle Levan. I'm the Assistant Director for the Center for Clergy Excellence for the North Georgia Annual Conference. I've been in this job for the last 10 years, and I am also a provisional or being recommended to provisional interviews, and will interview with the Board of Ordained Ministry to be a provisional deacon in February.
All right. And Angie?
Hey, I am serving as the pastor at Livingston United Methodist Church in downtown Columbus. I am a provisional elder, currently working on ordination paperwork, hoping to be ordained in May of 2026.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you both for all the many ways that you have already been serving the church. But I want to start with way back at the beginning, before the votes, before the policies, before maybe you even knew what a book of discipline was. Every call story begins with God's whisper. And so why did you feel, or when did you feel, the call to ordained ministry? And Angie, we'll start with you this time.
I call it's a pretty long route. I grew up in the Church of Christ and didn't hear anything about grace the entire time I was growing up. And once I understood my identity a little more and I came out, I was basically disowned by my family. And so caused a lot of church hurt. I left the church for a while, really had no designs on going back into the church, and happened to make a trip to the Vatican while I was visiting with a friend. The story goes that most of my friends know the Sistine Chapel is a place where I encountered God. God found me in a state that I was willing to listen, and had that whisper that said, it's time to come home. And I didn't know what that meant at first. And certainly it wasn't apparent that it was ordained ministry, but figuring that out over the course of a few years and making my way back into church in general, being denied baptism in a non-denominational church and starting to attend a United Methodist Church, I was really able to piece together what that larger, deeper calling was that I had been feeling and trying to discern for several years at that point. So mine was very unexpected, certainly not one I had from a young age.
Yeah. Nice. Thank you. Michelle, did you go meet the Pope and hang out in the Sistine Chapel, or?
Quite envious of that, honestly, because no, I haven't been to Italy. It's on my bucket list. But I grew up in the United Methodist Church. I am a cradle United Methodist, and I went to college knowing I was headed to seminary. I felt a call to ministry in high school, and the clergy I knew said, "You go to seminary." Well, the only way to go to seminary was to go to college, and not many people in my family have been to college. So I went to college with the intention of going to seminary. And also, by the time I got to seminary, I very much was aware of the fact I was gay and trying to figure out how to navigate that in conjunction with seminary, and knowing that the process was not going to be easy. For me, I knew I couldn't navigate the process if I couldn't have my full integrity and be honest and open. Like, I just didn't want to. I know lots of folks navigate that, and I knew that was just not a path I could do. But I also was faithful and knew that God was going to make a way somehow. I think when you're faithful to God, God will find a door. It may be that the door is at the Sistine Chapel and you walk through it, but it may also be that the door happens to just be at one of our seminaries, and it gets you in a ministry setting so that you can figure out how God can use you and then just be available for that. And that's, I mean, I've spent the last 20 plus years just being open to wherever God was directing me to be able to serve and be in ministry.
And so, Michelle, you were able to, like, you realized, hey, the path for ordination is not going to come right this second, but you were still involved in various ways within the church, particularly at Emory University. Would you share with folks a little bit what you did at Emory?
Sure. I started in the admissions office. I actually went to Perkins School of Theology, so let me give a little shout out to SMU. But when I was there, I also worked in the admissions office. And so I started in the admissions office at Candler, and then I transferred over to the course of study school. And I helped direct the course of study school for 10 years at Candler, working with our local pastors and really, in a lot of ways, serving as pastor to the pastors. When they were in situations that they felt like they couldn't talk to their district superintendent because maybe they were getting moved and they were heartbroken about that, I got a lot of phone calls and spent a lot of time doing a lot of pastoral care with folks about just to be faithful and to know that things would happen. It might not be what you wanted. It might not come how you expected it, but to be faithful.
Yeah. So, and there are so many people on my cell phone right now who would be like, I owe my time in ministry to Michelle Levan. So thank you for that work. You know, Angie, you didn't have to wait to be in the pulpit. Um, I can you walk us through a little bit what that means? Because you actively serve a church in West Ohio now. So can you walk us through a little bit of what that process looked like for you?
Sure. So when I started in a United Methodist congregation and began really understanding what that call was, well, first I had to be baptized, and I was. And then a year later, my wife and I actually had gotten married by then, and I was able to enter candidacy here in West Ohio. And one of the things I was told immediately, this district is actually, you'll probably be okay in this district. But once you get to the conference level, you'll probably have a little more problem with that. But I went ahead and I went through the entire process, certification and all of that. And DCOM continued to pass me through. I was able to go to licensing school, get an appointment. My bishop at the time kept me appointed primarily due to the fact that that appointment process is separate from the Board of Ordained Ministry action. And so I remained grateful that my bishop and my district committees were able to see those fruits for ministry. I never ever went through any part of this process not being out. And so uh, I happened to be in a place where that could be my reality, even with a few years of running up against no's at the Board of Ordained Ministry level. The DCOM continued to keep me licensed along with my bishop at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, how fortunate. But also
Exactly.
how many years of full ministry we have missed. So even though you were able to get almost there, you were kept right outside that door for a little bit. I wonder, and we did not discuss this previously for our dear listeners, but I wonder if you could go back in your time because there are a million steps from that small, still voice, either as a Cradle United Methodist or in the Sistine Chapel. coming into the full identity of who we are as people, but also who we are as United Methodist and being called to ministry. Um, could you go back to 2019? Just a second. I can see the looks on your faces. At RMN, we had done a lot of work to try to prepare for that. You're trying to figure out how many votes you have, and it still felt pretty disastrous. I wonder, in a sentence or two, could you talk about like what you were feeling as 2019 was happening and maybe even like immediately after? Yeah. How did that? I can see your faces. So, Michelle?
Well, I think what's hilarious is I was busy planning a wedding. And so I got married in April of 2019. And so, all this chaos is going on at General Conference, and it's painful and it's awful. But at the same time, I'm like, you know what? I'm right in the middle of being weeks away from getting married. And I just turned all my focus that way. I was like, this will have to be later. Like this is something I'm going to have to deal with later. And one of my really good clergy friends later said to me when I had called to invite her to my wedding, right? We were doing some this was like a week or two after General Conference. And she says to me, wait a minute, why are you not getting married at the United Methodist Church? And she was just completely clueless, right? Completely had missed the rainbow flag party. And she was like, oh my God, Michelle, had I known this, I would have been calling you every day during and since General Conference to check on you. And I was like, it's perfectly fine. I'll deal with that later. So I just had to table that. I had to organize my priorities in 19.
All right. Put it in a box, put it over on the table, and went and got married. Woohoo! Shout out to your wife. Angie, what was 2019 like for you?
The General Conference in 2019 actually came just a few days after my first denial by the West Ohio Board of Ordained Ministry. So that was not a great few weeks. The pain kind of was compounded. I think some of us, and I actually went to St. Louis for that General Conference, and I think some of us had just the smallest amount of hope that it would go very, very differently than it
Right.
did. And to be in that space was absolutely devastating. I dare say most of us didn't know if we had a future with the denomination that we love. And in some respects, it didn't feel like we did. I know that there's so many of us who just knew that we were supposed to stay the course because there is something so beautiful about this particular way of understanding the gospel. And to hand that over, it didn't sit right with a lot of people. And so as devastating as it was also empowering to see people come back and say, no, this is what we really are.
Yeah.
What you're seeing is not us. And we're going to reclaim this. That was healing in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I'm reminded of something, Michelle, you said to me when we were speaking last week. You said as a cradle Methodist, you were born into a church that was already the United Methodist Church that we're seeing now, and that you weren't going to let them. What was the phrase you used?
I think I said hijack my church. That's probably what I said.
I'm not going to let them hijack my church.
I mean, I really do feel like I must have grown up in some kind of an anomaly of a United Methodist Church because it was rural North Carolina. But I think the pastor who I grew up with, he was progressive, maybe beyond his time. But what I really learned was about grace and love and God's incredible care for us, right? And that everybody was included. I didn't know people weren't included. And so I think that has sort of structured and set me on my course is that I'm like, well, I'm included. I just need the rest of y'all to catch up.
Okay.
I mean, and I've had plenty of opportunities to exit, but also our United Methodist theology is who I am at my core.
Yes.
I could go somewhere else, but I wouldn't be happy there because it wouldn't be my theology. It wouldn't be what I am steeped in and what I love. And so for me, it has really been about stay the course and help everybody else and their mama who can change this system. And that is exactly what I've done. I mean, that's what the whole last 10 years has been helping people get through an ordination process that I haven't been able to do, but also having faith and hope in every one of those candidates that this can be the one who helps change our system. And they are, right? Like they are. That's the people who are changing our system.
Yeah, beautifully, beautifully spoken. I think for me, the period from 2019 to 2024, and you've both mentioned the word grace already, but that period for me was full of people saying, "Oh, I'm leaving. I'm going to the UCC. I'm going to be Episcopalian. I'm just done with this." Or, I'm headed into a different vocation. God has called me, but God's call is going to have to wait. I mean, all of these different things. So I do want us to pause for just a second and think about the vast number of people we lost, that though the church has changed the vote and we've taken care of the language in the book of discipline, we lost a lot of folks and a lot of gifts for ministry. And I'm still saddened by that, even though most of them are elsewhere doing great ministry. Yeah. But so I'm saddened by that and still give thanks for those of you like you two who stayed. Now, I want to turn just a little bit to, and maybe this is a bit painful, but Angie, when you were telling me your story and you were told no 6 times,
I
is that right?
was.
6 times? And then
Yeah.
Michelle, you just pointed this out, like, you work every single day. Here you were, like, helping people get ready, knowing every time you did that, you couldn't there wasn't a you for you in the
Right.
process. You weren't able. So what did it feel like? What did you cling to between those no's, Angie? You were told no 6 times and you still had to show back up at church. And Michelle, even though it wasn't a verbal no, you're helping other people who get to walk down a path that you can't go down yet. So what were you able to cling to between all of those no's that kept you going?
Like you said, every time I had a no, I still had to show up at the church. And really, that was what kept me going. It was the ability to continue to show up, to continue to be with the people that I loved and was serving alongside. And folks who, after my first no, also just like the next day, being able to show up and observe communion with folks who were living on the land at that point. There's something so beautiful about that to me, to have that no from a system, but to still have the yes from what God is doing in and amongst us as people who are doing everything we can to be faithful. Does sometimes mean we do that when we hurt, that it doesn't negate the hurt. But to be able to continue to serve was always such a salve for me. I know that it was an anomaly for me to be able to be out and to continue to be appointed. And I did everything I could to be grateful for that and not to be bitter, which I know it would be so easy to be. And I know that there are folks who have been so deeply hurt that they do end up carrying a lot of that pain. And I don't fault anybody for that. We have different circumstances. So my experience and my response has been different, but I was glad to be able to have my community of people to hold on to.
Yeah, wonderful.
Mhm.
Michelle, what about you? Every single day you're preparing folks who can go down a path that you can't go down yet. What did you turn to?
I think it really came to on I chose to hold off on being in that process, right? Because I didn't want to hit the no barrier, right? And so knowing that I wasn't going to start the process until I could get through the process.
Okay.
Um, and so that was one thing. But I think also for me, it's constantly been who am I helping in this system to make this system better? Right. Because there is the system and then there's the group of people, like Angie talked about, the group of people that you go and you're with and they continuously affirm you. And for me, like every day that I'm in the system helping somebody, it's an affirmation, right? But it also is a moment where I'm like, we have to make it better. We have to make the system better. We have to make the church better. And so I think for me, just continuously knowing that I'm helping people come in who can make it better is
That kept
what
you
holds
focused.
me. Yeah. Yeah. Because if I leave, then if all of the whole gay community leaves, then why do they even have to change? Right? Then the system never changes. So
That's true.
if some of us stay, it forces a change, but it also puts people in the window to say, these are really great people who should be clergy in our denomination. We've got to get them through.
Very true. Very true. All right. So we've gone through 2019, which was very rough. You've been told no and no and no, or even, Michelle, you're protecting yourself from hearing the no, but you're still behind the scenes working. And 2024 is coming. And I have just totally made my exit from the church world. I'm watching what RMN is doing. I'm watching what the United Methodist Church is doing with, I guess that there's a meme of like somebody like, looking around the shower curtain to be like, what's happening? So that was sort of me. What did you allow yourself to have hope going into 2024? Angie?
There was a part of me, I think deep down, that still held on to some of that trauma from 2019. But I remember driving down to Charlotte. I drove down by myself, and I remember I was listening to my playlist of my favorite hymns and imagining what the future church could look like if everything went as we were hoping. And I could feel it. I really didn't know if that was going to come to pass, but I did allow myself to have that hope. And I think a lot of people held on to that. And we knew that there had been a lot of work behind the scenes to help make the church better, not just for LGBTQ people, but for our siblings in our central conferences as well. There had just been so much work, and we knew that it could be such a great benefit to all of us that it seemed like this was the setting in which this change could actually come.
In a minute, I'm going to ask about what hymns and playlist you were rocking out to as a former Church of Christ kid. Michelle, okay, so you drove down, hang on a minute. Angie, you drove down, so you were already in Charlotte for General Conference.
I went about halfway through, yeah.
Okay, halfway through, Angie is there. Michelle, did you drive to General Conference, and were you hopeful?
Drove to General Conference, but only to have dinner with a group of my colleagues from across the connection who were having a dinner. And so I drove up from Atlanta. My mom lives north of Charlotte, so I drove from Atlanta, had dinner with them, and then went to her house to hang out for a couple of days. And while I definitely was hopeful, I refused to watch any of it. I was like, because of when it was and work-related things, I just didn't have the bandwidth for the trauma if it ended up being like 19, right? And while I was incredibly hopeful that it would not be, I couldn't watch any of it. And I started getting text messages the next morning after I had been there for dinner the night before. I started getting text messages from clergy friends that says, you've always been compatible and now you can be clergy in like your fullness. And I was like, oh God, what's happening? I need to turn this thing on.
Yeah.
So, so I wasn't even watching it because I thought I have watched too many of these things. And it was very healing to not be watching it and then to have people start just endlessly texting me things that were happening on the floor.
Yeah. Well, so Angie, actually, Michelle was one of a great number of people I spoke to that day. So I live about 3.5 hours from Charlotte. And it was, you need to go to Charlotte. You need to be there for that last RMN worship service. And so I was like, oh, I don't know. Lots of emotion. And so I did. I drove down. And went to that last RMN worship service where I hid behind a pillar in the church and just wept. Just wept. And of course, when you're weeping in church like that and having a very just emotional moment, you are trying to be like, I don't want to be, a scene here. And then you look up and you're like, everybody's weeping. Everybody is rejoicing. Everybody is having this hallelujah, woohoo, we finally made it moment. So I wanted to say thank you to both of you for being witnesses to that moment and for the work that you were already doing to help the church become where it is today, what it is now. So thank you to both of you. And I wonder if you have anybody that you would say has been a great witness alongside you or before you in this work, or who helped you get to where you are today that you'd like to give a little shout out to. Who came before you? Who are the shoulders that you are standing on in this work? Angie?
I think the person I would have to name first would be the person who first welcomed me into a United Methodist Church, current RMN board member, Deb Stevens. She was pastoring my home church at the time that I walked in the doors, really sat down with me that first time and listened to me, has walked me through my call the entire time, actually baptized me. So having Deb journey with me this entire time up until this present moment has been such a gift. And she's going to probably listen to this and start crying, and that's fine. You're welcome, Deb.
We love
But
you,
to
Deb.
know, yes, we do. To know that there are people who continually put themselves out there with the privileges that they do have has just been a wonderful companion for me. And, certainly Deb's not the only one, but she would be the start of my journey. So she's going to be my special shout out.
Thanks. Michelle?
The downside to having responded to a call to ministry 30 years ago and not progressing through a system, all of those people who formed and shaped me are part of the cloud of witnesses for me, all of them. As I was having to write my call statement, my autobiographical piece for the commissioning paperwork, I just kept writing, and they're dead. They're dead too. And I say that in joking, but I mean, these are the people who shaped me, but they're also the people who will not be there. I hope next annual conference to see the flourishing of what they set in place.
Yeah.
With God's help a zillion years ago. But in the meantime, I'll just give a shout out to the North Georgia Board of Ordained Ministry, because those folks have been incredibly wonderful for me for the last 10 years of constantly affirming the work that I've been doing with them.
That's wonderful. Special shout out then to Deb Stevens and to the North Georgia Board of Ordained Ministry. So thank you. Thank you for all you did to prepare these two wonderful folks in front of me now. I want to, as we come to our closing here a little bit, I want to talk about the thread that holds both of your stories together. And so, unbeknownst to each other, when we were chatting, you both talked a lot about the word grace. And you both said, listen, we're Wesleyan, we believe in grace. And I'm wondering, yes, there was a lot of emotion the night of the vote, and there's been a lot of emotion this year as we've we've made it through a year. What does grace look like, not just as a doctrine that you would say like, yep, I'm a United Methodist, but also as lived experience? Because although we've gotten rid of harmful language, we're still real people living into this very real identity. Some of our churches have moved many, many steps forward. Others are still on the journey. So what does grace look like for you in your settings now as a lived experience? Michelle?
Oof. I feel like it's just the everyday conversations that you have with people where you hear their story and you hear about how they're encountering God, and in that there's just no single path, right? Like that there's so much room at the table for everybody's journey and for everybody to experience God in so many different miraculous kind of ways. And that for me is that is the super grace right there, is that there's a space at the table for everybody.
Yeah.
And that everybody is invited, everybody's expected, just come on. We can slide over, we can make more room. And you just do. It's like the big family table, and it's like, we got another room for another chair.
Okay. I like that. I'm thinking the song, I want a house with a crowded table.
Mhm.
There you go. Yeah. Angie?
Yeah, I would say something pretty similar to that. All along my journey, there have been people who, as I went along, I've had conversations with them, and it's been really transformative in a lot of ways to remain in conversation, even as people who said, I believe you're called, but the book of discipline says this. And to be able to remain in relationship and grow those relationships, and to be able to celebrate now who we are becoming. For me, that's one way that grace shows up, is that the Spirit has transformed people through us. And I'm always really grateful to witness that. That's not only people who have maybe not been on the side of full inclusion the whole time, but also the people who are coming back into churches because we're still there, still allowing and asking God to work through us. So to be able to continue to do that, for God to work through us, for me is probably one of the most incomprehensible expressions of grace that I can imagine.
Yeah. Building relationships with those who didn't even see me as a person, and still being able to depend on that relationship for certain things. And then I think you said full circle, coming back full circle now to where you're at has been beautiful. I- In a minute, I'm going to ask how you are still becoming, because this is stories of becoming. But in what way, like what's next for the church? What have we not done well that we need to do better?
I think we still have a lot of opportunity to understand how LGBTQ clergy in particular are just as capable of living out authentic, fruitful calls to ministry as anyone else. I know, Ohio in general is a pretty red state, and our bigger cities tend to be a little more blue. And I'm in one of those bigger cities, and we know that there are going to be congregations who are not ready for us. And so I think that's one of our biggest growing areas, is to help people feel more comfortable, at least having that conversation rather than outright saying, no, we would never take a member of the LGBTQ community as one of our clergy. That's, I think, where we are right now with people saying that. And I think we need to move beyond that, not in a forcible way, but of bringing folks along, because that's what creates true change. But even beyond the LGBTQ clergy and laity that are in our churches, we have to do better about, I think, living into the realities of regionalization
Mhm.
and understanding that the U.S. church is not the end all be all of the United Methodist Church. Um,
Absolutely. Decentering. Decentering. Yeah. Michelle?
Kind of think Angie hit it, especially the education around preparing churches for clergy, right? And this has been the experience of women clergy in general already. So you would think we've learned something. Maybe we need to learn a little more, but also cross cultural appointments. This is the same conversation. And so, but we need to do it better. And we need to do it, I think we need to do it with a little more grace and a little more understanding. But also, I think it takes relationship building. You can't, um, our system is just not one that functions like a bull in a china shop. And so you really just have to be so grace filled in all the conversations and take the opportunity to build relationships. And I mean, I think for me, that's been one of the most sustaining and transformative things. And that has kept me in the UMC is those relationships and just constantly building them. Because somewhere down the road, I think I've always been hopeful that some of those relationships would cause somebody to see people differently, right? Whether it's they see women clergy differently, whether it's they see the LGBTQ community differently, like it would be an experience that they could fall back on and say, I have had good experiences with. And it could be that piece that helps them help a church navigate those conversations as well.
Yeah. Sexism didn't end when we decided to ordain women.
It did not.
Racism didn't end when we decided to desegregate. Colonization isn't going to magically end because of our regionalization vote. And, even though we've removed the language, we didn't install language that says, goodness gracious, people, thou shalt not be discriminatory against LGBTQI. We just removed the permission to do so. So now for you, where is the Spirit tugging you? at this point in your life. And where are you going next? We are going to pray with you, and no one will give a bigger hallelujah than me when that happens, but for both of you. But where's the Spirit moving you next? What are you becoming?
The Spirit is helping me be an editor. I got my 130 pages back yesterday or Monday night from my editor. So I'm now doing all the typo fixes. So I am becoming a better writer, maybe a more succinct writer, probably not. But I mean, for me, it is becoming an opportunity to finish fulfilling a call that started 30 years ago. Being extremely hopeful for the next steps and walking into the interview room in February. And just for full disclosure, I am not interviewing with our Board of Ordained Ministry in North Georgia. I am interviewing in another annual conference just for fairness and all of those sorts of things. But it doesn't take away any of the stress or any of the anxious feelings, but I am trying to become less anxious about this process now that I'm in the middle of it.
I will pray that you become less anxious. I did think about that when you gave North Georgia a shout out. I was like, well, some people are going to think that's a really, no. Thank you for clarifying that. Angie, what are you becoming?
I would say I'm becoming not just a better pastor, but a better me as I continue to do ministry day in and day out, figuring out what really works for me as far as leading people, not just administratively, but on a pastoral care level, on a preaching level. Still, I don't think that identity ever stops growing stronger for any of us. And so I think being at this point where I am finally able to request ordination, that for me has been very healing in a lot of ways and has allowed me to, I don't know, I would say feel a little more free to do ministry as I have always hoped to do. And when I say always, I mean since I started understanding a call, since again, not cradle called, but certainly for a number of years now.
Angie, what would you say to an 18-year-old Michelle Levan, knowing what she's about to go through and knowing where the church is now?
Stay grounded in your identity as a beloved child of God. Know that to every extent that you have been called, you will be carried through this by God and through the community that continues to surround you in the name of God.
Michelle, what would you say to a young Angie Cox who is going to have quite the journey from Church of Christ to leaving the church to finding the church again and hearing a call in the Sistine Chapel?
That slogan a few years ago, it gets better. I think that's where we have to start, in that knowing that this might be a rough place and a rough patch, but knowing that you're headed toward the United Methodist Church, you will know and you will feel it, that God has a hold on you no matter what. The beautiful thing about our theology is you can run, but God's chasing you.
Absolutely.
I mean, like God is accompanying
Absolutely.
you. You're running like a mad person,
Yes.
right? But God can keep up with you step by step. And so that to me has to be the comfort we give to everybody, is that you are never alone. God is always right with you, caring for you, guiding you, and God will put you in the place where God has intended for you to be, and will put the people in your path. Just hold fast and know it will get better.
Very nice. Well, Angie and Michelle, thank you both. It does get better. And thank you both for your faith, for your endurance, for your witness. Thank you to everybody listening. I pray that these stories you've heard today remind you that grace doesn't rush, it restores. Thank you for listening, and tune in next week. Stories of Becoming is a podcast from Reconciling Ministries Network, sharing the real stories of people and communities living into God's inclusive love. Through honest conversations about faith, courage, and transformation, we explore how the United Methodist Church and the people who call it home are being reshaped by grace. Be sure to like and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube, and we look forward to being with you next time.